those. And that's all for me. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started.
All righty, and I guess I'll pick things right up. So I will start my timer and say welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Um, got some fun stuff to share with you today. A few different things. I think we're gonna be talking a lot of things image wise. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And I just want to point out a couple things. Katie did a great job with the intro. Thank you so much. Um, I wanted to point out a couple of the tools I use outside of Photoshop to help showcase and present my work photographically, because that is my background, but also tutorials, things along those lines. One of the ones I use all the time is Adobe Behance, and you can see it's up on the screen right now. I write a lot of tutorials on how to do things in Lightroom and Photoshop and some of our other tools. There's a lot of information here. And I also share that through an Adobe portfolio, which is a little more structured, right? I can go and focus on specific areas like generative AI or stock photography, that kind of thing. These are both great tools for getting your name and your brand out there and just having a nice curated collection of content. And the last thing I'll mention before we get into the nitty-gritty is Adobe Stock. I'm a contributor to our Adobe Stock library, and I am very happy with being able to share that my work that way. It's always a cool feeling when someone actually pays to license one of your assets to use in whatever their project may be. So it's kind of a little bit of a rush, and it's a great resource, especially if you're talking to students who are in the design areas. Something else to consider, because you don't have to pay anything to sign up for Adobe Stock. You can just, as long as you have an Adobe ID, you can start contributing your work, and it's been pretty good. So those things out of the way, I'm going to pop back over to Photoshop. We're going to pop into a couple different areas here. We're going to be looking at Photoshop. We're going to be looking at some mobile components as well. We're also going to talk a little bit about Lightroom Mobile, capturing imagery there. So hopefully a bit of a mixed bag that I think everyone will hopefully get something from. And where I want to start here is obviously in Photoshop. I'm currently in the beta. There's a couple of new bells and whistles in here, but by and large, it's essentially just it's got everything that the current version has, plus a little bit more basic. So what I want to do is talk a bit about, well, the hot topic for everybody is generative AI, right? AI in general, artificial intelligence. And Adobe's no stranger to artificial intelligence in its tools. In fact, I think probably the earliest example is probably going back to, I think it's 2010, when we introduced content-aware fill. Now, it wasn't generative AI, but it used Adobe, our brand of artificial intelligence called Adobe Sensei, to essentially fill in areas in an image that needed to be either added to or corrected or cleaned up and things like that. And at the time, 14 years ago, it was exciting stuff, and it's still available inside of Photoshop, but we see a lot more capabilities coming into play now. Now that generative AI is part of the package. But before we get into that stuff, I want to show a couple different things here. First of all, Photoshop is the 800-pound gorilla for for digital imaging. And as I often say with Photoshop, if you can find a way to do something in Photoshop, there are probably 10 other ways to do the same thing. So there's not always a right way. It's what works best for you, what's most efficient for you. And as we're seeing more and more technology, artificial intelligence incorporated into the tool set, some things are becoming much easier to do. You know, for example, this is a stock image I pulled off of Adobe Stock, and this used to be, if I wanted to select this model from his and remove him from the background or vice versa, this was a painstaking process of lasso tools or possibly the quick selection tool with a lot of refinement. And it became a pretty decent challenge to actually remove that background. And what we've seen, if you're in my Adobe Express course earlier today, and what we're seeing as well inside of our mobile and desktop tools, is we're trying to make it a lot easier to do these um, cumbersome or tedious things. They have to be done, but they aren't necessarily the best use of anyone's time other than getting it done and getting it done right. So in a case like this, where we've got this model on this in a dark suit on a dark background, this could be challenging. But right now I've got it open on screen, and just down below the image, you'll see one of the new functionalities inside of Photoshop, and Photoshop in the beta version as well, is the contextual taskbar. What we try to do here is give you a floating bar that is trying to guess what you need to do next or what you want to do next, rather than having to necessarily hunt through all the panels and et cetera and all toolbars. It tries to guess what you might want to do. Now, in this particular case, it's starting off with a couple things. Oh, you might want to select the subject, or you might want to remove the background. Either one of these is applicable, but in my case, what I actually want to do is remove the background. So as I said, in the past, I could do this with a variety of different tools like the lasso tool, polygon tool, magnetic lasso. I could have done it through our selection tools as well, quick selection. Um, but here is the thing. All those are great, but they take time. And sometimes, the old phrase, time is money. It's a cliche for a reason. What I'm going to do here is go into my contextual taskbar and just click remove background. And within a few seconds, there he is. He's totally removed from the background. He's masked out. Now, this is non-destructive. In fact, if I go over to my layers panel over here on the right-hand side, and I right click and disable that layer mask, you can see the background is still there. So I'm not erasing anything permanently. I've always got the option to fine tune it, because like any tool, it can sometimes be a little off in places. So I may want to tweak my selection. And the great thing about masks is that I'm not deleting any content. So if I needed to add something back, like maybe the back of his hair or something like that, I can just paint that back in rather than having to undo the remove step or the erase step and try to do it again. It's all completely flexible and non-destructive, which is really, really handy. And then what I can do with something like this is I can take, and again, the contextual taskbar is constantly updating based on what I'm doing. So now that I've removed the background, the assumptions are, oh, maybe you want to import a new background, a new image, right? That you might already have, another stock image, for example. Or if you don't have a stock image or a photograph of your own, maybe you want to generate that background. And in my case here, I'm going to try generate background. And I'm going to type in here, busy downtown theater district. Oops, gotta watch my spelling. With many people out of focus. Okay, so I'm giving you a relatively descriptive prompt, and I'm just going to hit the return key or tap the generate button. And within a few seconds, I'll get some examples of what I can do, what I can pick from. And we've seen, I've shown this a little bit in terms of, oh, wow, that actually looks pretty darn good right off the bat. I get three choices here, all very different and distinct. I think probably this one is the most suitable, but I could probably get away with this guy as well. But I like that one. And that didn't take any time at all. So from a compositional perspective, it's pretty quick. Now, I do want to stress that, all this technology is very, very new. And if I was publishing this to social media or small dimensions, it's probably going to be fine. But as with anything, this technology is always getting better. In fact, I usually tell people with generative AI, what you see today is the worst it's ever going to be, because it's constantly improving. But if we zoom in a bit here, you might start to notice some quality issues. Okay, in this case, because it's so out of focus, we actually works out pretty well. But you've got that ability to generate these in completely different scenes, right? And just from the standpoint of being able to make that selection so quickly, that's one of the big bonuses. And then being able to iterate ideas for that background. Even if you're not planning to use the ones that are supplied, you've got that ability to try out different ideas, try out different prompts, and experiment with those. We also got the capability to somewhat enhance that generated image. If you take a really good look at my thumbnails over here, you'll see a tiny little icon in the upper left corner, which if I click on it, it will reanalyze the image and make it a little sharper. It's not a huge difference, but it does help a little bit at times and with areas of detail. And it takes a second or two for that to happen. So we can take that and have have some experimentation with that. Um, and what we've done here is we've not reduced the creative capability component because I'm still deciding what I want to do, but we've certainly reduced the time factor. And when you're dealing in a production environment, that can be really, really beneficial. Now, the one thing I didn't do, and I'm going to show you this on another image, is talk a bit about, well, how do I know this is a real, how do I trust what I see here? Or how do I not trust what I see here? Is there a way for me to gauge? Well, that got a little strange. Okay. I've been having some technical issues today, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's one of the ones that's going to crop up. But how do I determine as a viewer, an audience person, someone seeing this image for the first time in its current form, that this is a real image or not? What was done with it? And we'll be talking a bit about content credentials and the Content Authenticity Initiative as well today, just to see how that fits into place. But I can essentially enable that capability on an image I'm working on inside of Photoshop so that essentially changes I make to the image are tracked and recorded in a tamper evident manner for viewing later on if I want to. So that's sort of a tease in some of the things you can do right off the bat. I've got another example of this guy that I'm going to show a little bit later on where I had some fun. But let's go and take a look at some of the things that are kicking around that we're constantly always having to do. This is a photograph I took just this weekend past. I was at a location just around Kingston, Ontario, an island called Amherst Island, and they're known for their dry stone walls. Okay, so there's no concrete, there's no mortar or anything in these walls. They're just literally held together by rocks and friction and some strategic placement of those stones. And I photographed a few of these, a few of the people finishing off this wall, and it was a very contrasty, sunny day. We got a lot of shadows. It was a little bit challenging from that perspective. So I would normally bring this into Lightroom. That's where I usually do this kind of work, but I want to show you how you can do the same kind of thing, same kind of image adjustment inside of Photoshop. Now, there's a couple things to consider. Photoshop can be non-destructive, meaning that it doesn't permanently alter any pixels, or it can be destructive, meaning I can just start editing this and changing things. And when I save it, that's the file. There's no way to go back. So if I want to do some significant exposure changes, there's a couple different ways I can do this. One of them is by creating adjustment layers. Okay. And we have a whole range of them here. Hue and saturation, brightness and contrast, curves, levels, color balance, white, black and white conversions, vibrance, and so on. And every time I click on one of these, I'll go to levels, for example, you'll see that a layer gets added to my image. And that layer is just to adjust the histogram, the levels inside the image. So I can go in here and drag these sliders around, maybe brighten things up in the midtones, maybe drag the black in a bit just to give me a little more contrast. And I think the whites are probably okay. I don't want to brighten those up particularly much, but maybe just a little bit. So I can do that, and it's totally non-destructive. I can, instead of, I'll show you the destructive way as well, just so you know the difference. But I can hide that layer, and you'll see there's the original, there's the new one. Subtle changes, but important ones, right? That help make the image more readable, more legible. All right, so I'm going to ditch that layer, drag that down to the trash can. Let's take a quick look at how this was done destructively, just mostly so you know, try to avoid it if you don't know already. And that's under Image, adjustments, there's all the same adjustments we just saw. In fact, there's levels right up at the top. And I click on that. In this particular case, I'm going to go fast. I'm just going to click on auto. And that brightens up the image, adjusts the contrast for me, but it's applying it to the actual image, to the actual pixels in the image. So if I was to save this file right now and open it up tomorrow, it would look just like this, and there'd be no way to undo that change, right? That's what we mean by destructive, right? So I'm going to cancel out of that. There's a third way to do this, right? Because like I said, if there's one way to do things in Photoshop, there's usually 3 or 4 or more different ways. And the third way is by creating or by using a filter called Camera Raw filter. Now, if you work with photographs and you work with Lightroom, you'll, especially if you work in Lightroom, you'll be very familiar with this filter. It is basically Lightroom in a little dialog box, right? It's the Camera Raw controls, but applied as a filter. Now, again, I can apply those destructively just by going to Filter and choosing Camera Raw filter, which will do basically what I was just doing with the levels feature. It'll hard code all my changes right into the image. But in my case, what I'll do is I will go to filters. Oops, hang on a second. For some reason that's not behaving itself. Filters. Oh, okay. Not sure why it's, oh, that's because it's already a smart filter. I got ahead of myself. I've already converted this to a smart filter. Let me show you the difference here. Just going to go and go to my history panel. There we go. All right, so I'll go to open. This was the original file. You're not going to see any difference visually, but at this point, it's completely a regular image. It's not in a non-destructive form. If I go up to filter at this point, I can convert for smart filters. And what that does is it turns this into something we call a smart object and basically preserves all the original pixel information. Now, this is advantageous for a variety of reasons. I could be doing it from an image editing perspective in terms of changing color, brightness, contrast, etc. I could be doing this because I want to scale the image smaller and then I change my mind and make it and return it to its original size. Again, normally a destructive action, but if you're using your image as a smart filter, as a smart object, all that original resolution is being preserved, and you're just basically you're not losing anything by making something smaller, scaling it down, then scaling it back up again. And a little hard to see here, but there's a little icon in the bottom right, and I missed it. That's how I was wondering what was going on. It indicates this is a smart filter, okay, or smart object rather. So now I go back to filters, and we're going to go to Camera Raw filter. And this is going to open up a secondary box that is the Camera Raw filter. And we'll see a lot of, if you've worked with Lightroom or if you work with the Camera Raw tool inside of Photoshop with raw files, you'll recognize this. This is a lot of the same things you'll see in Lightroom. So I can, like I did earlier, I can click auto. And that gives me, actually, I like this auto version better. It's got a little more punch to it. But I can scroll down here. I can go into say, oh, let's go to light. And maybe, well, those shadows are pretty pumped up as it is. So maybe I'll just beef up the exposure a little bit more, take down those highlights a little bit, something along that line. And then I can continue on through here. Maybe I want to change the color balance. I can try and do an auto color balance here. That warmed it up a little bit, which was kind of nice. And then if I really want to, let's see, go to effects maybe. Yes, I think I'll add a little bit of a vignette to sort of bring the viewer's eye. And I'll do really extreme just so you can see what's happening there. I won't go that far for real. Maybe about 15 or 20, maybe soften that feather up a bit. So it just sort of darkens the outer edges a little bit and brings the eye back into the scene. And the last thing I'll do here is I notice that there's a guy in the background here. Right now, there's a couple of things I could consider doing here. I could go into Photoshop and remove him. And we might even try that if we've got time. But right now, what I want to try and do is just sort of make him a little less distracting. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a tool called Lens Blur. And Lens Blur is an AI feature. And when I turn on apply, it's going to give me the ability to sort of replicate shallower depth of field. Now, I won't get too technical in terms of cameras, but I was shooting this with a Micro Four Thirds camera, which is a very small sensor, um, bigger than a smartphone sensor, but not as big as a full frame camera. And as a result, I often get very deep depth of field. Now, in this particular case, I'm not sure why, but it's giving me way more than I wanted. So I'm going to tone this down and let's see. Ah, that's why. I'm going to set my focus on this individual right here. Target that. Yeah, okay. So I'm having, oh, there we go. Okay, it's behaving itself now. It just took a minute to play nice. All right. So now that I've got my main subject selected, it's probably taking a minute to refresh, but I can play around with that scale here. Yeah, no, I'm still having an issue here. That's interesting. Okay. But normally what it'll do is it'll allow me to adjust the depth range in the scene so I can blur the foreground a bit or blur the background a bit and give me possibly a more pleasing result. Right. So I'm just going to drag that boost down and maybe just bring the blur up a little bit more and see if I can get it to play nice. And yeah, it's okay. Well, on a good day, and in my case, that was about 45 minutes ago. This is working just fine. So, so I think my computer is getting a little tired. So I'm not gonna actually apply that because it's going to look kind of strange. And we'll just go back to our regular view. But I still have made some significant changes overall that are all non-destructive. So I can preview those changes just by clicking on the before and after. Right. So I can see what it looked like before and see what it looks like after. And if I like what I see, I can click OK, and it will apply those effects non-destructively to my image. It may take a few seconds to do that if it doesn't completely crash on me in the first place. And yeah, it's misbehaving. Okay. Not sure what's going on there. Well, well, well. It's not live if there's not a little technical glitch in and around. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. Just get rid of the whole thing. All right. I will instead go back to open. There we go. One more time. You've got the general idea, but let's just make sure that this is actually going to play nice. Let's convert for smart filters. Okie dokie. And back to my filters. Go to, whoops, not lens correction. Filters. There we go. And camera raw. And I'm just going to do one quick thing, just see if we can get that change to play in, because I want you to see what you can do with it afterwards. I'm just going to choose auto. Okay, so we got something going on there. Going to click OK. Let Photoshop do its thing. Okay, so now we can see a definite difference. In fact, if I hide that filter from view, you can see there's been a significant improvement in the overall brightness contrast of that image. So I can quickly do that, and it's a non-destructive effect, right? So I can turn it on, turn it off. I can delete the filter itself, and I'll go back to my original file. So that gives me some capabilities for correcting images. Now, I do a lot of this stuff, as I said, I do a lot of this work in Lightroom before I get to Photoshop. I leave Photoshop to do the heavy pixel lifting, if you will, in more cases than not. But I love the fact I've got this kind of control and a similarity in terms of workspaces, moving from two different Adobe applications. I can really do a nice round trip of things. And in fact, if I take this image, if I started off with this image in Lightroom and brought it into Photoshop and saved it, it would actually come back and be registered inside of my Lightroom catalog, which was also really handy because then I can see both my original version and the newly edited version. Okay, let's take a look at a couple other things, a couple of interesting things that are going on here with our tool set, talking about AI again, so jumping to that. This is a photograph of me and my brother I'm the handsome guy on the right, in case you're wondering. My brother's the excited one on the left. And this is typical of a lot of photos you find in photo albums, right? They've got some scratches on them, maybe they've faded over time. They're just not as nice as they could be. Well, we've got the capability to make changes to this in a variety of different ways. We could use selection tools and our various filters to correct for these things. But instead, what I can do is I can go into my filters here. I could choose something called neural filters. Now, neural filters are kind of like how do I put this? They're kind of like a, a public beta lab for Photoshop. In fact, you'll see in many cases, a lot of these are listed as beta filters, meaning that they're constantly being developed and worked on. And you'll see some of them here. We have one for smart portraits where we can do things like make minor changes to facial expressions and eyes and things like that. We've got one for landscapes to change a summer scene to a winter scene. And the one I'm mostly focused on in this particular case, pardon me, is photo restoration. If I turn that on, I get two options here. I've got my photo enhancement capability, and I've also got the ability to reduce scratches. Now, the scratches weren't working very well earlier today, but the photo enhancement was, so I thought I'd show it to you. There we go. So I didn't have to do anything, right? I just basically turned on the filter, and I can control that impact or that effect with these sliders. So the more I go to the left, the more subtle the change, and it has to sort of revise things a bit. The more I go to the right, the more more color, more saturation, more richness we're going to see. I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to live dangerously. I'm going to try my scratch reduction, see if we get anything going on there. And that would normally pull away all those damaged corners and give me a much nicer looking image. So we'll see what happens. And may take a second or two. And you can actually use your on-system hardware to do the work, or you can actually push the image to the cloud and have a more accurate result created as well. Pushing to the cloud does take a little longer, right? And it is bandwidth dependent. So just keep that in mind. So we'll see if we get a better result. It's the longest 2 seconds of anyone's life. Yeah, and it's actually not behaving itself the way I expected. Okay, but we did get a chance to see how we can sort of quickly retouch and sort of bring an old faded photo back to life. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. Oh, by the way, I'll also point out before I cancel, if I like the results, I can either embed them into the existing layer, basically change the image completely, or I can put in a new layer with all the changes on it, or a new masked layer. So a masked layer would be the changes will only show up where the changes are needed. Or I can turn it into a smart filter or even create a brand new document. So lots of ways to be non-destructive with these neural filters. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of that. And let's see here, what else have I got? I want to show you a couple other things here. We took the model. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is another one here. So this is that same dry fit wall. And what I wanted to do with this was I've got that same gentleman and they're taking smartphone photos, and I've got someone in a very poor posture position out of frame over here on the left-hand side. So what I did in this particular case was I wanted to remove those elements, right? And what I did was I combined um, the ability to select an object as well as the ability to generate new material, new information. So what we're seeing right now is the original image. And over here in the layers panel, you're going to see two generative fill layers. The first one is, I'm going to turn that on, is the fellow in the background off to the left. And much like we saw earlier with our model, our male model, I have three different variations of that effect. What I want to point out is in this particular case, I didn't type anything in to tell Photoshop what to do, to tell what to generate. I literally left it up to Photoshop to analyze the image and decide to determine what should go in there in its place. And take a really good look up here in the upper left, you'll see that sign. It's not particularly legible, but if I turn that off, you'll notice it's also significantly blocked by that individual. So without any prompting on my part, Photoshop recognized there was a poster there. And when they removed the person, they also sort of added to the sign. And I've got a couple different options that show that. So I think the third one was my favorite. And then the other element here was after selecting our gentleman with the smartphone, same kind of idea here, use generative fill to remove him from the scene. And we got well, shrubs, I would say, not forest, shrubs in the background, some loose rocks in the area where he was standing, all very quickly done. Again, tying in with that AI component, just making my job a little easier. Now, in reality, um, I could have cropped this image and removed him entirely a traditional way, but getting rid of him would have been a different story. I would have either had to recompose my shot when I was there and try to get around them, and so that he wasn't in the image. But as it stands with this particular image, it was easier to use generative fill to remove him. This is a really interesting teachable moment in many ways. And I'll preface this with some context. I taught photojournalism for years at Centennial College, where I used to be a teacher. And, you know, from a journalistic and documentary perspective, the only option I had or would have been to have cropped this individual out. This guy was not leaving the photo at all. So from the standpoint of how you're using the images and the intended purpose of these images and how you're utilizing this technology, it's always good to realize what you're doing, what you're allowed to do, what the limitations may be based on how the image is being intended to be used. If I was running this in a newspaper, I could crop it and that's it. If I'm doing this for more artistic purposes, maybe for an advertisement or something along that line where I'm not, it's not specifically a news or current events focused image, then I could remove him without any trouble and not feel bad about it. But it's a good thing to think about in terms of how you're applying these changes and how they're going to affect the overall image and the overall story. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to point out something else while we've got this image up. This little icon here that says CR. This is content credentials. Now, I talked briefly about this earlier, and what content credentials are is they are essentially a digital nutrition label, if you will, that when they're enabled at the time you open the file, will track all the changes you make to an image and record that information as metadata that can be embedded into the image or posted to the cloud. Now, in my case here, I didn't start with that. So you'll notice it says enable content credentials. And this is an intentional, by design, um, arrangement in the sense that we don't force creatives to adhere to content credentials unless they desire to do so. So if I do this and I turn it on, I'll see a couple bits of information. It'll tell me what the content credentials will indicate. Because I sort of started late, it'll probably indicate some things were done, but they don't have the exact steps. But I'll also see down below, I can enable certain features, who the producer of this was, that's me. Any connected social media accounts I have, I can disable or enable these. So the 4 that we have right now, Behance, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And then what do I want the content credentials to record? And in this case, it's edits and activity. So it'll do its best to record all that information. And then when I go ahead and export this, you can choose export as, and you'll see over on the right-hand side, once the image loads up, the content credentials currently still in beta. We're still refining it, but they are enabled. And I'm actually being asked, do I want to publish these credentials or not? So I'm going to choose OK, just so we can see the settings. And you'll see here, content credentials in beta. How do I want these credentials published? Do I want them published at all? No or none? Do I want them published to the cloud, or do I want to attach them as tamper evident metadata to the actual file? And that only works for JPEG and PNG files at this time. I tend to push this information to the cloud, and I'll show you why in a second. But I can choose to preview what will be shared. And this is the information that will be shared publicly for people who try to verify the image. Okay, I'll see what tools were used. I'll see some edits were done but weren't recorded. And at the very least, what I'm seeing here is that we know things have changed with this image, right? So it gives me the ability to develop a level of trust in the imagery, and I can share with others. And more these days with generative AI, this is becoming more and more important that we do this kind of thing, that we're aware of it. In fact, to the point where the Content Authenticity Initiative, which was spearheaded by Adobe, has now over 3,000, I think it's over 3,000 members. And these are media organizations, news organizations, um, companies, advertising agencies, um, you name it. There's a whole range of different organizations getting involved. Camera companies as well, Canon, Nikon, Leica, Fuji are the ones that come to mind. And they're actually working on incorporating the ability to record this information at the time of capture. And why that's important is that a lot of cameras now do a lot of what we call computational photography, or they can, and you can do special effects right in the camera that look real. So having the ability to record those steps at the point of capture is also something we're very interested in making sure that photographers and their audiences understand what's been happening with those images when they were captured, and hopefully the photographers are transparent with it as well. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. Okay. So, selection tools, AI, these are two big components with inside of Photoshop that have really accelerated in their development over the past year or two. You can generate completely new images, not just backgrounds, but I can ask Photoshop to generate a brand new image if I so desire, from nothing, with nothing built in, just add a text prompt and away I go. So there's a lot of capability there. But there's other things we can do that are a little more traditional, but still, I think, kind of important and interesting to know about. So let me see if I can find my right image. Sheep is one of them. Let's start here. I'll enable my content credentials for that. We looked at how you could remove a background and then add a new background in, but sometimes it's not about removing the background. Sometimes it's just composition is not quite right. Again, this is another shot I did recently, and I was trying to exclude an old wire fence on the right-hand side, but the composition suffers because a lot of the animals are right up at the edge. So normally this would be a kind of thing where too bad, so sad. Or I could spend a lot of time with traditional retouching tools to try and generate that background area. But again, talking about the way we can work with these tools with AI and to help things out, rather than generating an entire image, I can just give myself a little bit of breathing room here and set my cropping tool to generative expand. And when I do that and click the checkbox, within a few seconds, I'll end up with that little bit of extra background on that one side that makes it compositionally not so awkward, right? And it can be really, really beneficial. And it actually even added sheep this time. And I say this time because when I was working with this image earlier, I got just grass and trees and sky. Um, Generative AI is a lot like the old Forrest Gump bit about, it's a lot like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And it's very true because it is literally imagining what should be there that's not there currently. And again, I've got options. I have three choices: one with sheep, one without sheep, and another one without sheep. And I think actually I'm torn between these two. I think I'm going to go with this one because I have a feeling that sheep might look a little strange. So there it gives me that little bit of breathing room to make that image that more impactful. Now, another one I want to show you is, bear with me as I scoot through a few of these. So I've got a fair number, bear with me. And that is not the one, but I think that gets me in the right ballpark. Oh, okay. I'm not sure where it went. Oh, here it is. Good. Okay. This is a photograph I took of, well, you can see what it is. I'm not going to narrate that. It's a couple of apples in an apple tree. But I have two versions of it. I have a version where apple in the background is in focus, and a version where the apple in the foreground is in focus. Now, traditionally, you could try doing this photographically by adjusting your aperture and trying to increase the depth of field. But the challenge you get with that is a lot of times you get more in focus than you want. And by that, I mean the background back here in the left-hand side and below the apples. So I can use an interesting technique called focus stacking in Photoshop that takes two images, ideally shot with your camera on a tripod, but in this case, they were handheld and I tried to keep things very similar. But you'll notice there is a slight difference compositionally. Whoops, I want to see at least one of them. So there's slight differences just because I'm a human being and I move, right? But what I can do is I can select both of those layers. They're both separate images. Go to Edit. Oops. We go to Edit and choose, first of all, Auto Align Layers. What this is going to do is Photoshop is going to, based on my guidance, look at both of those images and do its level best to line them both up. So we end up with some oddness, oddities happening around the edges because the images are slightly different positions. But now, if I turn this one off, you'll see that they're very close in terms of position. The only difference is one of them, we're seeing the in focus apple and we're seeing the out of focus or the in focus apple in each of these compositions. But that's great, Jim. So what? You now have strange borders and two pictures that still aren't what you wanted. Well, how do I fix this? Well, here's the next step. Edit. Auto blend layers. And this is, I'll be perfectly honest, something I've been doing more recently than ever. Where I'm taking multiple images, landscapes especially, not so much photographs like this, but a landscape shot where I want the foreground in focus and I want the barn that's a mile away in focus. And that can be a challenge sometimes to get it all perfectly sharp. So in this case here, I'm just doing it with the apples because they're easy to see. I'm going to choose Auto Blend Layers, and I'm going to choose the option to stack the images. And down below this, you'll see two other checkboxes: seamless tones and colors, content aware fill, transparent areas. Not generative fill, content aware fill. Okay. So what's going to happen is all those areas that look kind of strange, that checkerboard pattern, that's basically transparent spots. It's going to try and fill those in with pixel data from the original images. So all I do is click OK. And again, Photoshop does its analysis. It will take the two images, blend them together into a new layer, and mask out. Give me the masks for the two other images and showing me what was utilized and what wasn't. And if I just hide everything from view, this is the new version. I'm going to zoom in a bit here. Now both of these apples are perfectly sharp. Now remember before, hide one of these guys. That was the in focus one there. So before we had one apple in focus in one frame and one apple in focus in the other frame. Now I've got them both in focus, and it was done just by utilizing the tools that have been in Photoshop actually for quite some time. This is not new stuff, but it is very powerful if you know about it and know when to make use of it. And if you look around the edges, you can see it's done a pretty good job of blending those transparent areas. If I don't like what it's done, I can always crop it a bit tighter. There can definitely handle some cropping here without any issue. Okay, so get rid of that. There we go. And sorry, there we are. So that's another thing that you can do is experimenting with that kind of technique if you're working with it from a photographic perspective. Now, a couple other things I want to mention is in terms of, I can't forget to show you one last thing here. If I can find it again. Yes, okay. I want to show you one last thing here. This is our model again with a different background, but I was experimenting a bit more, had a bit of fun with generative fill. And I used something called a reference image. And that is an image that wasn't part of the scene. It was a separate photograph entirely that I was able to use to guide Photoshop and Adobe Firefly to generate specific types of information. So here he is in his original tuxedo, the background obviously different from the original. But what I did was I took that and I started to experiment with other images and what would this model look like in a pilot's uniform, right? And if I take a look here, I'll see there are my variations for that pilot's uniform. I can move through these guys. And if you look really closely, I think that was the one I liked. At the very top here is a small thumbnail of what we call a reference image. And that basically gives me the ability to say, match this style, match this, the details that are in this original image and make that fit with what I'm trying to do with my final composition. And just for fun, I did the same thing with a clown outfit. Because hey, well, if you can't do clowns with a serious male model, what can you do, right? So, and there's a couple different ones that will, the odd one's a little weird, but I think that was my favorite. But that's again a kind of thing you can experiment with. Now, okay, let me go here. Sorry, I've got a few minutes left. I want to bring up a couple other points here, and that is first of all, I've been doing all this here. The assumption you probably all made with my photographs is I'm loading them right into Photoshop. I've transferred them to my hard drive, and away I go. What is the actual fact is that most of my photography workflow these days starts obviously with my camera, but then goes from camera to my mobile device. So it could be my smartphone, it could be my tablets, which you may or may not see there. It's typically my tablet just because it's a bigger screen. But and I'll move things through Lightroom inside my mobile devices, right? So that gives me some control over being much more lightweight and portable if I'm on the go. It also means because I have what's called Lightroom Mobile on my phone, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up for you guys to see. There it is there. I have to remember not to touch my laptop screen when I do this. There's Lightroom down there in the bottom right. And it's going to launch essentially a version of, brand new version, apparently, of Lightroom right on my phone. So I can do all those things I was doing in Camera Raw even before this image gets to my hard drive. Not only does that mean I can pull my camera photos in through a card reader, but it means that if I'm using my phone as the capture device, then I've got the ability to do that editing right then and there. In fact, what you're seeing right now is a display that's in our house. I do a Halloween Village display every year. Yes, I know I have issues, but that was shot on my phone. So I can literally open that up and start going in and playing with settings like auto, maybe going to the light settings, and beefing up the shadows a little bit, maybe maybe making it a little bit brighter, like that, and then dropping the highlights down a little bit. And then we were doing this earlier. I'll go ahead and go to my effects and just add a bit more of a vignette. So I'm able to play with all this stuff right on my device that captured the original image. And from there, it's going to sync up with my desktop. Right? We don't have time to get into that side of the workflow, but you've got that capability in your hand. And let me just quickly show you one other bit about this. I'm going to go back up to my main view here. Okay, this is all of my pictures, including some video. But there we go, and we'll go into Lightroom. And down in the bottom right corner, you're going to see two little icons, one that looks like a camera and one that looks like a photo. So if I've taken pictures with other camera apps on my phone, I can click on that photo icon and actually pull in images that I shot with, say, my iPhone's camera app, right, or another camera app that I may be using. The other option I've got is I can actually take photos. I have a built-in camera right inside of my Lightroom mobile device, my mobile app. It's utilizing a lot of the technology that's in the apps themselves or the phone itself. And you can see my rear view camera there. I can go ahead and move this around, change my orientation, do whatever I want. If I see something I like, which with my desk, let's face it, there's not much to like. It's a work desk, but I can just tap the button, capture an image, and then go back out to Lightroom. And because I shot an HDR image, it'll take a second, but it'll load up at the top of the screen. There it is. I can go right into this and I can start working with this. I'll set auto, maybe take the highlights down a little bit more, and maybe give myself a little bit more contrast or clarity. And I'm capturing right off the bat. So whatever device I have, whatever inspires me, if I see something I like, if I don't have my main camera with me, who doesn't have their phone with them, right? And Lightroom mobile app is a free download. If you have a Creative Cloud membership, you get all the functionality. If you don't have a Creative Cloud membership, you can still use it to capture images and do some basic editing. So you get a lot of flexibility and a lot of control over it. Okay, last little thing I'll point out is one other mobile app that I think you should be aware of is Photoshop Express. Now, don't confuse it with Adobe Express, which we saw earlier today. Photoshop Express is a mobile app just for editing pictures. And I'll just scroll through. You can see you've got generative AI capabilities. You can see your camera roll. You can do some quick actions if you've got portraits, things like that. It's meant to be a real simple way to correct photos you've taken, right? So it is, again, free download. And worth maybe investigating. You can do lots of interesting border effects and all those kind of cool, funky things a lot of camera apps offer. That's all built inside of Photoshop Express or PS Express. And that's available Android and iPhone as well, or iOS. So, okay, that is that. I'm going to minimize my screen here. And I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Let's see where we're at. Okay, we have four dedicated people, and two of you I know have to be there. So, how are we doing? Any questions in the chat?
I have a question real quick about
Sure.
what you just showed about Photoshop Express. Is
Yeah,
that free if you have an Adobe account, or even if you didn't have an Adobe account, could you use it?
excellent question. It is, I believe it's free. It's okay. The way it typically works is it's free, but you typically have to have a free Adobe ID set up.
Okay.
Okay, so you're not paying anything, but you do need to create an Adobe profile to access the application. I think with Photoshop Express, there's some extra functionality or filters and stuff like that you can actually buy. At least that's the way it used to be. But the majority of the functionality is already there, built into Photoshop Express.
Cool. Yeah, I just
Okay,
wanted to ask in case like
sure.
students graduate and if you can still use it.
Oh yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I mean, and Lightroom too. Lightroom mobile app can be used on graduation as well. It just you won't have things like syncing with your desktop and stuff like that. It'll be
Okay.
more of just a local based application or mobile app rather than something that incorporates the whole ecosystem.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat. But we do have a few minutes here if anybody has any. Hopefully that's giving you some ideas on what can be done with Photoshop, where it's going. And I will point out one other thing for reference for you guys. Let me just pull it up and I'll paste it in the chat pod. Talked a lot about AI capabilities in our various tools today. And I've actually created a small website that sort of centralizes a fair amount of this information. It's not totally exhaustive, but this is something where I break it down based on products, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, Acrobat, talk about Firefly. We talk more about the Content Authenticity Initiative. It's all built into this website I'm sort of trying to maintain. So feel free to bookmark that or have a look. I hope that everyone got a little something out of this that's a little bit different, maybe something you didn't expect. Hopefully, something you can definitely use in your next bit of image work inside of Photoshop or Lightroom or Photoshop Express.
So yeah, that link you just shared, I actually shared it at lunchtime. That was the link that I was
Okay.
that I was showing all of you. not
great.
all of you, but I mean in the luncheon, with the different, why AI in education is important. And then I didn't go into every little, AI features coming out in other apps or anything like that, but that's something that I was going to share with them today. So I'm glad that you've shared it.
Yeah. I do hope that the 3 sessions today have been beneficial, that everyone's gotten something out of it. As I always say, if you leave knowing something you didn't know coming in, then it was a worthwhile investment for you to have been here. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. I'm available. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on Behance. Just Google Jim Babbage. You'll either find me or the mathematician, who's long dead, so he won't answer your emails. But feel free to reach out if you have questions, and I'm always interested in seeing what students and faculty are doing with the tools. So feel free to share if you so desire.
Thank you so much, Jim. It
You're
was
welcome.
really cool. Yes, yeah, an awesome 3 workshops. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Most of us have been here from 9 a.m. So
Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Yes, and you as well. Like I said, reach out if you have more questions. If you are doing any feedback on the sessions, I'd love to hear it. So
will do. Thank you so much, Jim. And we do have one more workshop today, folks, on Adobe Premiere Pro that's being led by Karina, by a different Adobe expert. So we do have that going on today. And for any students here, we're doing a student meet and greet event at 4:30 in the Adobe Lounge with Steven. So if you're a student or if you know a student who might want to come to that, that's going to be in the Adobe Lounge, Park 212 at 4:30.
Great.
And if we don't have any other questions, I guess we can just finish up.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.